You have almost certainly never once bought a single thing with its name printed on it. And yet, this one quiet company assembles a very large share of all the world's smartphones. Inside factory complexes so utterly vast that they are genuinely nicknamed cities. It first began, fully half a century ago, by making cheap little plastic knobs for other people's television sets. And it went on to become completely indispensable, not by ever chasing fame at all, but simply by mastering the one hard job that almost nobody else on earth actually wanted. This is the story of Foxconn. Here is the pattern worth learning. Call it owning the brutal middle. Because you do not always need to have the famous name sitting right at the very top. You can win, instead, by quietly mastering the hard and the deeply unglamorous and the thin margin work right in the middle of the chain. And by doing it at a scale so enormous that nobody can ever copy it, until the famous names at both ends simply cannot function without you. So travel back to the year 1974, in Taiwan. A young founder, with only a tiny borrowed stake to his name, quietly starts up a little company making low-cost plastic parts. Its single most famous early product was the humble channel selector knob and the little dials for black and white television sets. It was, in truth, about as unglamorous as any business gets. But the company then made a very quiet and a very deliberate choice. It would never chase after a brand of its very own. Instead, it would simply become the maker for everybody else's brands. And so, all through the 1980s, it moved steadily from plastic into making the precise electronic connectors sitting inside the world's computers and its game consoles. It became the reliable and the cheap and the utterly invisible supplier. And then, in 1988, came the real make or break decision of all. It opened its very first factory over on the mainland of China, sitting just outside the city of Shenzhen. And it did not simply build a mere factory. It quietly began to build something far, far closer to an entire city. Vast, sprawling campuses, with their own dormitories and their own canteens, eventually housing many hundreds of thousands of workers, all in a single place. And here, now, was the great fork that truly defined it. It could easily have taken all of that hard-won skill and all of that colossal scale and used it to go and launch its own gadgets, its own phones, its own proud brand, and chase after those fat, comfortable margins that the big brands all get to enjoy. Or, instead, it could choose to stay quietly in that unglamorous middle and simply become the single best maker on the entire earth for absolutely everybody else. And it chose the middle. It poured every last thing that it had into being able to do the one job that almost no one else in the world could actually manage. To take a brand's finished design and then to ramp it all the way up to a truly titanic scale at genuinely blistering speed and with real and unforgiving precision. So that when the personal music player and then a little later the smartphone finally arrived in the 2000s, one single company could suddenly build them by the tens of millions almost overnight. It had made itself the one truly indispensable partner. Now imagine instead that it had gone and chosen that other path and had launched its own famous brand of phone. In that very same instant, it would have become a direct and mortal rival to the exact same customers that it utterly depended upon. And those customers, quite naturally, in order to protect their own precious designs and their own fat margins, would have very quietly pulled every one of their orders and handed them straight over to somebody far safer. It would have traded away a guaranteed river of the entire world's manufacturing for a wild gamble in a crowded market where it had no name at all. The trust and the volume would both have simply and instantly evaporated. But instead, it stayed right there in the middle, and it grew almost entirely beyond all comprehension. Today, it assembles the large majority of the world's most famous smartphones. One of its enormous Chinese complexes is now nicknamed, quite simply, iPhone City, and it can turn out several hundreds of thousands of finished phones in just a single day. It has quietly become one of the very largest private employers that has ever existed anywhere in human history. And here, it is only right and honest to pause for a moment, because that truly staggering scale has also come at a very real human cost. And the company has faced serious and genuinely painful scrutiny over the years, over the harsh conditions endured by many of its workers. And that too is simply part of the real and unvarnished story of exactly how the modern world actually gets built. Look back then at the true shape of the whole thing. This company never once held the crown itself. It simply and very patiently made itself into the one single thing that the crown could never actually be worn without. It went on to win almost the entire world, not by ever being famous, but purely by being utterly and completely and unavoidably indispensable. So here is the lesson worth keeping. Go and look once again at all of that boring and difficult and deeply unglamorous work that just about everybody else is quietly trying so hard to avoid or to simply outsource to someone else. Because sometimes, the very surest road to real and lasting power is not to go chasing after the glory at all. So ask yourself honestly, what hard and invisible thing could you learn to master so utterly completely that the whole wide world would, in the end, come to depend on you to do it?